The smell of motor oil and old wood shavings had settled into the concrete floor of that garage, the way memory settles into bone. Permanent, unannounced, impossible to scrub out. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Vanessa Alcott Hume, chief executive of Alcott Properties, and the kind of woman who scheduled her spontaneity, stepped out of a black car on Meridian Street and looked across the chain-link fence at the building that had been annoying her for 3 months. "That thing is a genuine eyesore," she said, not because bothering to lower her voice. "Someone needs to tell whoever runs that garage that this is a business corridor now, not a salvage yard." Her assistant made a note on her tablet. What Vanessa Alcott Hume did not know, could not have known, standing in her structured coat with her back to the wind, was that the man inside, a quiet, unhurried figure in a canvas apron named Daniel Voss, had spent 11 years as chief restoration specialist at the Bremer Coachworks Institute in Stuttgart, where he had rebuilt a 1937 Hispano-Suiza J12 from 37 crates of parts, and had his name on a plaque in the lobby of one of the most prestigious automotive museums in the Western Hemisphere. She did not know that he had left Stuttgart, not because the work failed him, but because Claire had gotten sick, and sick fast, and he had made a decision that was not really a decision at all. He had come home. He had opened a small shop on Meridian Street in Crestfield, Ohio, and told himself that ordinary work was still work, that a man with a daughter to raise and a grief to carry did not need to be extraordinary. He had told himself that for 2 years. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail is here for a reason. The garage had no sign above the door, only the number stenciled in black paint, 414, and a cardboard placard reading Voss Auto Service in letters Daniel had printed by hand the first week. In the back corner of the lot, under tarpaulin, weighted with a cinder block, sat the object Vanessa had seen and dismissed, a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTE, incomplete, rust-threaded, missing its left rear quarter panel and both door handles, on flat tires, like a collapsed sentence. To Vanessa's eye, it was scrap dressed in canvas. To Daniel, it was something else. It was the project Claire had found for him 6 years ago, printed from an estate auction website on a Tuesday afternoon while Nora was napping, slid across the kitchen table with the words, "Just look," written in her handwriting at the top of the page. Nora was 7 now. She kept the printout folded inside the plastic sleeve of her favorite book, a worn paperback of fairy tales Claire had bought at a library sale the summer before she died. The paper had softened along the fold lines until it felt almost like cloth. Daniel had not touched the Ferrari in 2 years. That was about to change. The morning Vanessa delivered her verdict, Daniel was inside replacing a brake caliper on a 2009 Camry belonging to a school librarian named Gretchen Poole. He worked without music. The sounds of a repair were information. and he had learned to listen to metal the way a doctor listens to breathing. He did not hear Vanessa. He was not yet aware that she existed, or that she had submitted a formal complaint to the Crestfield Business Improvement District describing his property as detrimental to the corridor's commercial image, or that the complaint would carry weight because Alcott Properties had recently been named lead developer on the Meridian Street Revitalization Project, a $42 million undertaking that could, if completed as planned, redraw the entire block. He found out on a Thursday afternoon. The BID letter arrived by certified mail, citing 2 municipal code provisions about outdoor storage and aesthetic standards. The fine was not large. The implication was, if the property did not comply within 30 days, the BID could flag it for formal review, which in practice meant the redevelopment committee, which in practice meant Alcott Properties, could make a case for a forced buyout at assessed value. Daniel read the letter at the workbench, standing up in the cold. He set it down. He looked at the tarpaulin covering the Ferrari for a long moment. Then he walked to the back of the shop and called a man named Ray Kowalski. Ray had worked with Daniel at Bremer for 4 years as a finishing technician, a man whose hands had laid lacquer on coachwork so fine that the surface looked less like paint than like light suspended in amber. He had returned to the States the same year Daniel did, for different reasons, and now ran a small paint and body operation outside Columbus. He answered on the second ring. Daniel told him about the Ferrari. There was a pause. "How bad is the shell?" Ray asked. "Salvageable," Daniel said. Another pause. "How long since you worked on something like that?" "A while," Daniel said. Ray drove up the following Saturday in a truck with Ohio plates and a toolbox that weighed, as he always said, more than reasonable ambition. He stood in front of the tarpaulin with his coffee going cold, and Daniel pulled the canvas back. Ray was quiet for almost a full minute. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see what it needs." What it needed was considerable. Both door seals had disintegrated. The original Colombo 512 block had a stress fracture along the number 7 cylinder wall, minor but present, the kind of flaw that announces itself only under particular cold light inspection, which Daniel had performed over Claire's printout the night Ray arrived, using a magnifying loupe kept from Stuttgart in a leather roll beside his torque wrenches. The chrome was pitted but recoverable. The left rear quarter panel was simply gone, lost somewhere in the 40 years between the car's last registration and the estate where Daniel had bought it. That panel would have to be fabricated from scratch, in steel. Ray asked who was going to do the fabrication. Daniel looked at him. Ray nodded slowly. "Right," he said. "Day 1. The work began on a Monday. Nora came to the garage after school on the first day of the restoration, still wearing her backpack, and stood beside the Ferrari with her fairy tale book clutched to her chest. She looked at the car with the seriousness that 7-year-olds reser- reserved for things they consider important, then looked at her father. Is it going to look like the picture? She asked. It's going to look better than the picture, Daniel said. She considered that. Mom said it was beautiful, even broken, she said. He did not answer right away. He had learned in the 2 years since Claire that some sentences deserved a silence before they got a response. She was right, he said. Nora set her backpack down, pulled out the paperback, and sat on the wooden stool Claire had painted yellow in the last good summer. She opened the book to a page near the middle and began to read. Daniel went back to work. The garage smelled of cold steel and old rubber and, faintly, the instant cocoa Nora had spilled on the workbench the week before. The light through the single high window was thin and October gray. It was a quiet beginning, the kind that does not announce itself. He did not yet know that the Ferrari had been photographed at that estate sale by a freelance correspondent for Classic Motor Quarterly, and that the photograph, blurred, low resolution, had been filed in an archive and quietly labeled incorrectly as a 330 GTC. He did not know that the misidentification mattered. It would come to matter very much before the end. Vanessa Alcott Hume returned to Meridian Street on a Friday afternoon in November, this time with an architect named Prescott Fenn and 2 BID committee members, walking the block for a preliminary site assessment. She stopped in front of 414 again. The tarpaulin was off the Ferrari. It sat in the open bay, doors removed, shell exposed, surrounded by labeled parts on brown paper in the careful arrangement of a surgical field. Vanessa looked at it the way someone looks at something they have already decided they understand. Still out here, she said. I assume the BID letter would have moved things along. She took a photograph, not from interest, but to build a file. Then she turned to Prescott Fenn and said, the parcel valuation here is going to be straightforward. Distressed asset. Owner will take a fair offer and move on. Prescott glanced through the chain link at the parts on brown paper and said nothing. He was new to the project. He had not yet formed his opinions. Daniel was visible through the open bay, bent over the engine block with a borescope in his right hand, a notepad on his knee. He did not look up. He had learned that most voices outside passed without requiring any response from him at all. Vanessa made a note and moved on. She did not know that Prescott Fenn would spend the following morning on a Ferrari authentication forum, trying to match the image he had seen through the fence to a chassis number, and that he would find a thread started by a collector in Zurich, searching for a specific 250 GTE, serial number 3045 GT. Absent from the documented registry since a private sale in Geneva in 1981. He would not say anything yet, but he had begun quietly to pay closer attention. The garage on Meridian Street was 11 feet wide and 40 feet deep, a converted carriage house with brick walls from 1908 and a ceiling so low that Daniel had to duck under the center beam. He rented it for $620 a month, the kind of rent that exists only in the overlap of a city in transition and a landlord who had not updated a lease since 2004. Word had found him the way quality always does, not through noise, but through sequence, until his calendar ran 3 weeks out and the people drove from as far as Medina to have him look at something other shops could not diagnose. None of that showed on the outside of 414 Meridian Street. The outside was exactly what Vanessa had seen and dismissed. The inside was something else. Along the north wall hung hand tools arranged so precisely that a machinist from Bremer, visiting on an ordinary Tuesday, would have recognized the system immediately, not because it was common, but because it was the one Daniel had learned from a retired coach builder named Werner Kusch, who had told him once that disorder in a shop was always disorder in the work first. Every gauge, every driver, every micrometer had its outline traced in black marker on the pegboard behind it. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. Ray saw the wall the first time he walked in and set his coffee down without speaking. Werner's system, he said finally. Werner's system, Daniel confirmed. They did not need to say anything else about it. By day 4, Daniel had disassembled the engine block completely, each component on brown paper in sequence, numbered in pencil on small tags of masking tape. The stress fracture would require metal stitching, threaded steel inserts along the fracture line drawing the crack closed without welding heat, which would have warped the block's geometry beyond use. It was slow work, requiring a specific drill set, a specific insert size, and a degree of patience that could not be taught in a short course. Nora came in on day 6 and looked at the numbered tags spread across the floor. "It's like a puzzle," she said. "It is a puzzle," Daniel said. "Do you know where all the pieces go?" He paused, not from uncertainty, but from the careful choosing of a word. "I know where they should go," he said. "The work is making sure they actually get there." She thought about that. She was the kind of child who thought about things rather than past them, a quality she had from Claire. "Mom used to say that fixing something right is a way of keeping it," Nora said. Daniel set down the micrometer he was holding. He looked at his daughter on the yellow stool, feet not quite reaching the floor, fairy tale book open in her lap. "She was right about that, too," he said. The cylinder wall repair took the better part of day 7 and all of day 8. On day 9, they addressed the door seals. Day 10 was the frame measurement survey required before any fabrication could begin. The frame was true, within tolerance everywhere that mattered. Daniel did not call it luck. He called it what it was. The original builders had done their job well enough that 60 years of indifferent storage had not undone it. A 250 GTE built in 1962 at the Scaglietti Coachworks in Modena was not the kind of object that surrendered its structure easily. What it demanded in return was a restorer who understood what it had been, not merely what it had become. Daniel understood. He had first worked on a 250 series Ferrari at Bremer in his second year under Werner Kusch's direct supervision in a workshop smelling of beeswax and mineral spirits. Werner had stood behind him for 40 minutes without speaking, then said quietly, "You have the feeling for it." Daniel had not understood what that meant at 23. He understood it now. The fabrication of the quarter panel began on day 11. He had sourced an 18-gauge cold-rolled steel sheet from a supplier in Pittsburgh, the correct gauge for the original Scaglietti specification, and spent 3 evenings building cardboard templates that hung in the corner of the shop like a small archive of the car's own geometry. Ray watched the templating and offered no suggestions, which was the highest form of professional respect he knew how to express. The panel would be formed by hand over a wheeling machine Daniel had owned for 9 years, never once used for ordinary work. It had waited in the back corner for 2 years before the Ferrari came out from under its tarpaulin. It had been waiting the way certain tools wait. Day 12 was the first pass. Day 13 was the second and third. On day 14, Nora stood at the workbench edge and watched the metal move. "It looks alive," she said. "In a way it is," Daniel said. "Because you're making it?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because it's becoming what it always should have been," he said. She opened her book, found the printed page in the plastic sleeve, looked at the photograph of the car, collapsed under a sheet at the estate auction, then looked at the gleaming arc of metal taking shape on the wheeling machine. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The panel required 12 passes and 2 full days of planishing before Daniel was satisfied. Ray primered the surface on day 17 and pronounced the fit correct on day 18. The last day he drove up from Columbus before the final finishing phase. He stood back and looked at the car. Engine reassembled, doors rehung, new panel fitted, chrome in place. "Daniel," he said, "this is the one?" Daniel looked at the car, the way that only becomes possible when the work is almost done, and the object is speaking in its own voice rather than the voice of its problems. "Not finished yet," he said. "No," Ray said, "but it's going to be." The call came on a Thursday morning, the kind of cold that gets into brick and stays. Daniel was under a Subaru Outback adjusting a rear strut when his phone buzzed against the workbench, and he finished the adjustment before picking it up. The number was a Chicago area code he did not recognize. The man introduced himself as Marcus Bellew, senior authenticator for the Concours Registry of North America, speaking in the precise, unhurried cadence of someone who had delivered important news before and understood that clarity mattered more than drama. He had been contacted, he said, by a colleague in Zurich, a collector named Albrecht Speer, who had been searching for a specific chassis for 11 years. Bellew had tracked the documentation Daniel had submitted 2 weeks earlier to the Ferrari Historical Register in Maranello. The Colombo block serial, the Scaglietti body number stamped beneath the left sill, The build sheet Daniel had found folded inside the firewall insulation during disassembly on day 4. Written in Italian in a hand so faint he had needed the Stuttgart loop to read it. That document confirmed what the misidentified archive photograph had obscured. The car was not a 330 GTC. It was serial number 3045 GT, a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTE, one of 14 factory-order cars built with the optional dual-circuit brake specification, absent from the authenticated registry for 43 years. Daniel listened. He was standing at the workbench with a rag in his left hand, and he set the rag down. Bellew told him the Concours registry would issue a full authentication certificate, that Albrecht Speer wished to discuss acquisition at whatever terms Daniel named, and that the car had been informally valued, pending the certificate, at somewhere between $1.4 and $1.8 million. He paused after the number, giving the listener room to absorb it. Daniel did not fill the pause. He had learned in Stuttgart that silence after significant news was the appropriate response to a thing that deserved its weight. He thanked Bellew, wrote down a number, set the phone on the workbench. Then he finished the Subaru. The authentication certificate arrived 6 days later by registered mail, a heavy cream envelope bearing the Concours registry seal, and it sat on the workbench unopened for 40 minutes while Daniel completed a timing belt replacement on a Honda already 2 days overdue. He read it once carefully, all the way through, then set it on the corner of the workbench under a socket wrench so it would not blow away when the bay door would open. He did not call anyone. He thought about Claire, briefly, and about the words look written in her handwriting at the top of a printed page. Then he went back to the Honda. Vanessa Alcott Hume returned to Meridian Street on a Friday afternoon in late November, this time alone. No architect, no committee member, no assistant. She had been made aware of the authentication through Prescott Fenn, who had finally formed his opinions and delivered them to her directly with the quiet certainty of a man who had been watching carefully. She stood outside the chain link for a moment before coming through the gate, looking at the Ferrari, fully assembled, the left rear quarter panel in gray primer, awaiting Ray's final top coat. That weekend, chrome back in place, doors seated, the car on 4 inflated tires, in a posture that was nothing like the collapsed sentence it had been. She stood in the open bay door, and Daniel looked up from the workbench. "Mr. Voss," she said. Her voice had changed register. It was still measured, still the voice of a woman accustomed to controlled spaces, but it had lost the tone that belongs to people who believe they already understand what they are looking at. She said his name the way people say names when they have recently learned they were wrong about the person attached to them. "I understand I may have been premature in my assessment of this property," she said, and of the work being done here. Daniel looked at her for a moment. He did not correct her. He did not mention the paperwork or the anxiety or the 30 days of compressed work against a deadline. He said, "What can I help you with?" She asked carefully whether he had any interest in a conversation about the corridor's future. "Not a buyout," she said, and something shifted in how she held her portfolio. "A renovation grant from the Revitalization Fund that could bring the exterior into the corridor's design standards while preserving the operating business. The BID complaint would be withdrawn." She said it without quite saying she was sorry, which was the nearest she was likely to get. Daniel told her he was willing to have that conversation. He told her she could call the shop. He went back to the workbench. She looked at the Ferrari one more time before she left. There was nothing left to say. That night, Daniel locked the bay door and drove home along Meridian Street with the window cracked, the cold air carrying dead leaves and the distant mineral sharpness of coming rain. Nora was asleep when he came through the door, the fairy tale book open on the blanket beside her, the folded printout tucked in its plastic sleeve. He closed the book quietly and set it on the nightstand. He stood in the doorway and looked at her in the low light from the hall, the kind of looking that does not need to find anything, because it already has. He went to the kitchen. He made tea he did not drink. He sat at the table in the dark, not thinking about the certificate or the phone call from Chicago or Vanessa Alcott Hume's altered voice. He thought about Werner Kusch standing behind him in Bremer's workshop, saying nothing for 40 minutes. He thought about what it meant to be taught a thing so completely that it became invisible, indistinguishable from instinct, until the moment a broken object required it and it was simply there. Skill, accumulated quietly, does not announce itself. It waits. It shows up when the work calls it forward, and it does the work, and it leaves no speech behind. Daniel had known that for a long time. He had come home and opened a small shop and tried to live by it, and the world had looked at his shop from the outside and seen something ordinary, because the world had not looked carefully enough. That was all. That was the whole of it. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and the garage on Meridian Street sat quiet in the November dark. The authentication certificate still on the workbench under the socket wrench. The Ferrari waiting behind the bay door for the final coat that would make it whole. Some things take time to become what they always were.